The storm had been building for 3 days, but it broke the hour before the Dominion conclave was set to begin, turning the stronghold grounds into a labyrinth of flooding corridors and wind-torn courtyards. I stood pressed against a stone archway, my thin traveling cloak already soaked through, watching werewolves of every rank rush past toward their assigned quarters like they knew exactly where they belonged. The air tasted of ozone and wet earth, of power gathering in one place, and wolves who would never have a fraction of it. I had never been good at being seen. The conclave happened once every decade, a gathering of territorial pacts where alliances were forged, disputes were settled, and the Alpha King himself presided over the fragile peace that kept our world from tearing itself apart. For high-ranking wolves, it was an opportunity to prove themselves, to climb higher in the brutal hierarchy that governed everything we were. For wolves like me, low-ranking, packless for all practical purposes, dismissed before I'd even opened my mouth, it was 3 days of trying not to be noticed, not to be in the way, not to remind anyone I existed at all. My fingers found the frayed edge of my cloak, worrying at a loose thread. "Keep your head down, Haley," my former Pax Beta had told me when the summons came. "Stay out of sight. You're only here because attendance is mandatory." His tone had made it clear what he didn't say. You have nothing to offer. You are nothing. I was 22 and rankless in a world where rank was everything. In our society, that marked you as either broken or cursed. The truth was simpler and cut deeper. I was forgettable. Around me, the chaos intensified. Wolves shouted to each other over the howling wind, trying to coordinate room assignments that had been thrown into disarray by a flooded lower level. I watched a group of elegant females from the northern reach glide past, their formal dress robes somehow untouched by the rain, their movements fluid with the unconscious grace of those born into power. They laughed at something one of them said, a sound like silver bells that seemed to mock the thunder. They moved through the world as if it had been built to accommodate them, because it had. They would never spend a single moment wondering if they deserved to take up space, never lie awake questioning whether they'd been made wrong for a world of dominance and submission, of clear hierarchies and even clearer destinies. A crack of thunder shook the walls, followed immediately by the groaning protest of the stronghold's ancient drainage system. Someone shouted orders I couldn't make out. The crowd surged, and I was pushed back against the wall, making myself smaller, invisible. All wolves to assigned quarters. The outer wings are flooding. Seek shelter in the central keep. The voice belonged to one of the Alpha King's guards, his authority cutting through the storm like a blade. My heart kicked against my ribs. I was supposed to be in the Western dormitories, the communal quarters reserved for wolves without rank or favor. Shared rooms, thin pallets, the constant reminder that you were there on sufferance. But the Western dormitories were in the outer wings, the ones they'd just declared flooded. I pushed away from the wall and started moving, my boots splashing through water that was already ankle-deep in places. The stronghold was a maze even in daylight, and in this darkness, with the storm reducing visibility to almost nothing and the emergency lanterns casting wild, leaping shadows, it felt like navigating a beast's belly. I passed corridor after corridor, each one clogged with confused, irritated wolves trying to follow instructions that kept changing. I needed shelter, just a corner somewhere, a room to wait out the storm and the chaos until I could figure out where I was supposed to go. I rounded a corner into a quieter hallway, one of the administrative sections, perhaps, or private chambers for visiting dignitaries. The walls here were paneled in dark wood, and the floor was polished stone instead of rough-hewn rock. It smelled different too, less like damp wool and pack musk, more like cedar and old smoke, and something else I couldn't identify, something that made my wolf stir uneasily beneath my skin. Ahead, I spotted a door, heavy oak banded with iron, standing slightly ajar. Warm light spilled through the gap, amber and inviting. My instincts screamed at me that I didn't belong here, that wolves like me weren't meant to walk these halls, but the alternative was drowning in a flooded dormitory or being trampled in the chaos of the main corridors. Just for a few minutes, just until I could get my bearings. I slipped through the door, easing it shut behind me against the howling wind. The immediate silence was shocking after the chaos outside. The room was smaller than I'd expected, not a grand hall but a private chamber, intimate and warm. The walls were the same dark wood I'd seen in the corridor, lined with shelves holding leather-bound books and what looked like territorial maps. A single lamp burned on a heavy wooden desk, casting long shadows that climbed the walls like reaching fingers. The floor was covered in a thick woven rug in deep reds and golds, and the air here was thick with that scent I'd noticed in the hallway. Cedar and smoke, and something underneath it that made my pulse quicken for reasons I didn't understand. Dominance, old power, territory marked so deeply it had soaked into the very walls. I took a step forward, my wet boots leaving dark prints on the rug, and that's when I heard it, the soft, final click of the door's lock engaging behind me. The iron mechanism had sealed automatically. My stomach dropped. I spun toward the door, but before I could reach for the handle, I felt it. The weight of a presence, the suffocating pressure of absolute authority that made every instinct I possessed scream at me to drop, to submit, to make myself as small as possible. I wasn't alone. I turned slowly, my breath caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat, and saw him for the first time. He stood near the window, half hidden in shadow, his silhouette backlit by flashes of lightning that illuminated the storm-tossed grounds beyond. Tall, broad-shouldered, perfectly still in the way apex predators are still when they've already decided you can't escape. Dark hair, dark eyes that caught the amber lamplight and reflected it back like an animal's. He wore simple clothing, dark trousers, a loose shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. But there was nothing simple about the way he occupied space, the way the very air seemed to bend around him. I knew who he was before he spoke. Every wolf in every territory knew that presence, that weight. Beau Hawes, the Alpha King. And I was standing in his private chamber, soaked and shivering and more out of place than a lamb in a wolf's den. His gaze moved over me slowly, cataloging everything. My low rank, my wet clothes, my obvious terror. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, controlled, and absolutely without mercy. You should not be here. And then, as I waited for him to open the door and throw me out, or worse, he did something I hadn't expected. He did nothing at all. The door remained locked. He remained exactly where he was, watching me with those unreadable dark eyes. And I realized with a cold, creeping certainty that settled in my bones like winter frost, he wasn't going to let me leave. The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. My voice came out strangled, barely human. I forced myself to try again. Your Majesty, I didn't know. I was looking for shelter, the dormitories flooded, I didn't realize. You didn't realize, he repeated, his tone flat, clinical. He moved then, finally, crossing the room with a predator's economy of motion. Each step was precise, unhurried. He had all the time in the world, I had none. He stopped at the door, his hand resting on the iron lock mechanism. For one wild, desperate moment, I thought he might open it, that this would be nothing more than a terrifying mistake I could apologize for and forget. His fingers traced the metal, then fell away. The security protocols engage automatically during conclaves, he said, still not looking at me. The chamber seals at nightfall. It will remain sealed until dawn. A pause, deliberate and devastating. Or longer if I choose. The bottom dropped out of my stomach. Please, I'll go anywhere else. I'll sleep in the corridors, You'll stay. He turned finally, and the full weight of his attention was like standing in front of an avalanche. Trespassing in the Alpha King's private quarters is a capital offense. Did they not teach you that in whatever pack forgot to give you rank? The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. He knew exactly what I was, what I wasn't. Wolves have been executed for less, he continued, moving back toward the window, dismissing me with his disinterest. Others have simply disappeared, erased from records, as if they never existed at all. My hands were shaking. My wolf was cowering, trying to make itself smaller, quieter, gone. He watched me from across the room, his expression unreadable, and I realized with horrifying clarity that my fear interested him. That he was studying it the way one might study an insect pinned to a board. You will stay, Bohaz said quietly, each word a iron bar sliding into place. Leaving is not an option. He expected me to break. I could see it in the way he watched me, waiting for the tears, the begging, the collapse into hysteria that would confirm everything he already believed about wolves like me. Instead, I took a breath, then another. The terror was still there, how could it not be? But underneath it, something else stirred. Not defiance exactly, something quieter. Something that recognized the futility of panic and chose stillness instead. I understand, I said finally, my voice steadier than I'd expected. You can't let me leave without consequences. It would set a precedent. His eyes narrowed slightly, the first crack in that perfect, controlled mask. I'm not asking you to, I continued, meeting his gaze even though every instinct screamed at me to look away. I'm just asking you not to kill me for a mistake. You speak to your alpha king, as if you have the right to negotiate. I don't. The words came out honest, raw. I don't have any rights here. I've never had rights anywhere. I'm low-ranked, forgettable, the kind of wolf people step over without noticing. Something bitter curled in my chest. But I'm also telling you the truth because what else do I have to lose? Silence stretched between us, broken only by the storm battering the windows. My wolf stirred beneath my skin, and that's when I felt it. The pressure of his dominance pressing down, testing, expecting submission. My wolf didn't collapse. It didn't submit the way it should have, the way every wolf in my position should have. Instead, it simply acknowledged him, calm, steady, unafraid in a way that made no sense. Bo went very still. His head tilted slightly, and I saw something flicker across his face, confusion, then something sharper, suspicion. Your wolf, he said slowly, his voice dropping to something dangerous, is not responding correctly. And I realized, with cold certainty, that whatever was wrong with me had just become very, very interesting to the most powerful predator in the territories. The lights flickered once, then died completely. The storm had found the stronghold's power lines. For 3 heartbeats, we stood in absolute darkness, and in that void, something fundamental shifted. My wolf rose, not in fear or submission, but fully, completely, in a way it never had before. I felt it unfurl inside me like something that had been sleeping, waiting, recognizing. And then I felt him. Not physically. We were still separated by the width of the room. But his wolf answered mine, a presence so vast and overwhelming it should have crushed me. Instead, it reached across the darkness with something that felt like question, curiosity, an instinctive pull I had no name for. The amber lamp on the desk sputtered back to life, dimmer now, casting barely enough light to see by. But it was enough to catch the look on Bo's face, shock, raw and unguarded, before his control slammed back into place. What are you? The question came out rough, almost accusatory. I don't know. My voice shook, but not from fear, from something else entirely. I've always been weak, everyone's always said. You're not weak. He moved closer, drawn by something neither of us seemed able to control. The air between us felt charged, heavy with a tension that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with connection. Your wolf is. He stopped, seemed to struggle for words. Stable, grounding. I felt it too, that unfamiliar sensation blooming in my chest, belonging. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a mistake, like something built wrong for this world. Bo stood close enough now that I could see his chest rising and falling, could feel the heat radiating from him. He didn't touch me, didn't need to. The space between us was intimate enough to be indecent. His dark eyes searched my face, and when he spoke again, his voice was quiet, almost wondering. Your wolf, he said slowly, is not what you think it is. The alarm shattered the moment between us. A howl cut short, then shouting, then the unmistakable sound of snarling wolves. Bo's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The man who'd been looking at me with something almost like wonder vanished, replaced by the Alpha King. Cold, lethal, absolute. Stay away from the door, he ordered, already moving. His hand went to the lock mechanism, and I heard the iron bolts disengage with a heavy clunk. What's happening? Rival packs testing boundaries. His voice was clipped, efficient. They always do during storms. They think chaos makes me vulnerable. He pulled the door open, and the sounds of violence rushed in, wolves fighting, guards shouting commands, the storm still howling over it all. Then he stepped through, and the door swung shut behind him. The lock engaged again, final, absolute. I stood frozen, staring at the wood that separated me from the chaos outside. He'd locked me in. Again. Abandoned me. Except, I pressed my hand against the door, feeling its solid weight, hearing the sounds of the battle growing distant as Bo moved toward it. The chamber was a cage, but it was also a fortress. These walls were built to withstand attacks. This door was built to keep threats out. He hadn't abandoned me. He'd protected me. The realization settled over me like a weight. Safety and captivity felt exactly the same. Time passed. Minutes or hours, I couldn't tell. Then footsteps approached and the lock disengaged. Bo entered and my breath caught. Blood streaked his knuckles, his shirt torn at the shoulder. But his movements were controlled, precise. Not a hair out of place beyond the evidence of violence. He'd been a monster out there. I could smell it on him, the raw dominance, the aftermath of absolute power unleashed. Yet he looked at me with that same careful control. "No one touches what is under my protection," he said quietly, and I understood. The words weren't meant for me alone. They were a promise, and a warning to anyone who might try. Dawn came, gray and reluctant through the storm-washed windows. The chamber should have unlocked automatically. It didn't. Bo stood at the door, his hand resting on the mechanism, listening to something I could barely hear. Voices, multiple ones just outside. I saw him enter alone last night, but the security log shows the door sealed with 2 heat signatures inside. Could be a malfunction, the storm, or someone unauthorized. A different voice, older, carrying the weight of authority. Counsel, I realized with creeping dread. During a conclave with rival packs present, the timing is unfortunate. Should we inquire counselor? A pause that felt like judgment. The Alpha King does not answer to inquiry, but rumors once started. Their voices faded as they moved away, but the damage was done. I looked at Bo and found him already watching me, his expression unreadable. "They know someone's in here," I whispered. "They suspect." He moved away from the door, toward the window, his profile sharp against the morning light. "By noon, the entire stronghold will be whispering. A woman, low rank, in the Alpha King's private chambers during the most important political gathering of the decade." My stomach twisted. I'm a liability. "You're a complication," he said it clinically, as if discussing a strategic problem. "There are protocols for this, quiet removals. A wolf who entered by mistake, who was never officially registered at the conclave." He let the implication hang. "No one would question it. No one would even remember you were here." I'd spent my entire life being forgettable. Now it could save his reputation and cost me everything. "I understand," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'd prepared for this, for being erased. "If it protects the stability of—" "No." The single word cut through my resignation like a blade. I looked up, confused, and found him watching me with something fierce and unreadable in his dark eyes. He didn't give the order, didn't call for guards, didn't erase me. And somehow, that was more terrifying than if he had. "What are you doing?" I asked as Bo moved toward the door with unmistakable purpose. "Ending this before it becomes a crisis." He paused, his hand on the lock. "Stay close to me. Do not speak unless I tell you to. And Haley," he looked back at me, and something in his expression made my chest tighten. "Do not apologize." The door opened onto a corridor filled with wolves, guards, council members, nobles from visiting packs. They all went silent the moment Bo appeared, their eyes moving immediately past him to me, disheveled, wearing yesterday's clothes, obviously having spent the night in the Alpha King's private chamber. The shock was palpable, electric. Bo stepped forward, and I followed on trembling legs, feeling every gaze like a brand. The whispers started immediately, rushing through the crowd like wildfire. That's her. Low rank, I can smell it. In his chambers all night. Counselor Thane. Beau's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. An older man stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral. I understand there have been questions about the security protocols in my chamber. Your Majesty, we merely sought to ensure your safety. The presence of this wolf, Beau gestured to me, and I felt myself shrinking under the weight of attention, was my decision. She entered during the storm. I chose to shelter her. Anyone who questions that decision questions my authority. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he'd just done. He'd claimed responsibility, publicly, in front of the entire hierarchy. Counselor Thane's expression flickered, surprise, calculation, something that might have been disapproval. Your Majesty, the protocols regarding unauthorized are mine to enforce or set aside. Beau's tone left no room for argument. This matter is closed. He didn't move, didn't flinch, and slowly, inexorably, the crowd bent to his will. I was no longer invisible, and there was no going back. The days that followed were strange, disorienting. I was given quarters, small but private, far better than the dormitories. Guards stood outside, but whether they were keeping others out or keeping me in, I couldn't tell, maybe both. Beau came to me in the evenings, after the conclave sessions ended. At first, I thought he was checking on his liability, ensuring I hadn't become a bigger problem. But then he started asking questions. The Southern Pact's territorial dispute, he said one night, standing by my window. Their alpha demands I enforce the old boundaries. The records support his claim, but enforcing it would displace 3 smaller packs who have lived there for generations. I finished quietly. He looked at me, surprised. I may be low-ranked, I said, but I've lived what displacement feels like. Those packs aren't thinking about territorial rights. They're thinking about survival. Something shifted in his expression. He listened, actually listened. It became a pattern. He'd present a problem, cold, tactical, political. I'd give him the part he couldn't see, the emotional truth beneath the power games, what wolves were afraid of, what they needed, what they'd never say to the Alpha King but would whisper to someone like me. His decisions began to change, subtly, a ruling tempered with mercy here, a compromise offered there. The hierarchy noticed. Some approved, others whispered about weakness. But the wolves who'd been heard, who'd been seen, they looked at him differently. One evening, he stood at my door and I realized it was open. Had been for days. You could leave, he said quietly. Return to your territory, I'd ensure safe passage. I know, I met his dark eyes. But if I stay, when I stay, it won't be because you've commanded it or because I'm trapped. I took a breath, feeling the truth of it settle in my bones. It will be because I choose to. For the first time since I'd met him, Beau Hawes smiled. Small, real. Then choose, he said. The final conclave session was held in the Great Hall. Every alpha and ranking wolf from every territory gathered to witness the closing declarations. I wasn't supposed to be there. Low-ranked wolves didn't attend these ceremonies. But Beau had sent for me. I entered through the side door, and the whispers started immediately. Guards flanked me, guiding me toward the front where Beau stood on the raised dais, commanding and untouchable in his formal regalia. He waited until I reached him, then extended his hand. The hall went silent. I stand before the assembled territories, Beau said, his voice carrying to every corner, to make formal claim. His fingers closed around mine, warm and certain. Haley Ligger of no pack and no rank, who entered my domain by mistake and showed me what I'd been missing by design. Shock rippled through the crowd. Someone gasped. Counselor Thane rose from his seat, his face darkening. Your Majesty, this is highly irregular, a wolf of her status. Is under my protection, is my choice, is my equal. Each word landed like a hammer. Any who challenge this challenge me. The dominance that rolled off him was suffocating, absolute, but his hand in mine was gentle. I looked up at him, At this king who'd kept me captive and then set me free, who'd learned to listen and chosen to change. My wolf rose, meeting his without fear, without submission, with recognition and acceptance and something that felt terrifyingly like love. "I accept," I said clearly, my voice carrying through the stunned silence. "Not because I'm commanded, but because I choose this, choose him, choose us." The backlash would come, the political maneuvering, the judgment and doubt. But standing there, his hand in mine, I felt only certainty. The storm had passed, the doors were open, and I was exactly where I belonged. The end. Thank you for watching Haley and Bo's story. If this tale of captivity turned destiny, of a wolf who refused to kneel and a king who learned to listen, resonated with you, if you felt the storm, the tension, and the transformation, I'd be incredibly grateful if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me bring more stories like this to life. Tales of power and vulnerability, of characters who enter the wrong door and find exactly what they needed, of love that doesn't just conquer, it transforms.